So today we've been asked to write the equation of this trigonometric graph. And you have to find 5 things. You have to figure out which function you want to use. Looking at this, it is obviously a sine or a cosine graph. You have to find the amplitude, the period, the vertical translation, and the horizontal translation. And another name for horizontal translation for some folks would be phase shift. Now, the first thing I look at is amplitude. The maximum occurs at 2. The minimum occurs at -2. And this tells me 2 things. It tells me that the amplitude equals 2 because the total height of the graph is 4 and the total height divided by 2 is the amplitude. The second thing this tells me is whenever your maximum and your minimum are equal but opposite, there is no vertical shift. Let me say that again. When your maximum and your minimum are equal but opposite, there is no vertical shift. So D equals 0. So I know A and I know D. And I'm looking for a function in the form y equals A cosine B x minus c plus d, or y equals A sine B x minus c plus d. So I know A and I know D very quickly and very immediately. Now, the next thing I need to do is find B. Okay, so I need to find B. Okay, well, here I have a peak. Here I have a peak. This occurs at 0. This occurs at pi over 2. So what does this tell me? The period equals pi over 2. Now, the period for any sine or cosine function is always going to be equal to 2 pi over b. So solve this equation for b. And what will you find? 2 pi divided by 4 equals pi over 2. So b must equal 4. Okay? So now you know A, you know B, and you know D. At this point, you have to choose whether you want this to be a sine or a cosine graph. Now, I'm going to do both. I'm going to do sine and then I'm going to do cosine. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with cosine because cosine would be a very, very, very easy to do here. This graph starts at a peak. Where's cosine supposed to start? At a peak. If cosine starts at a peak and the graph in question also starts at a peak, there is no horizontal shift or phase shift. So for cosine, C would be 0. So write that equation. That equation would be y equals 2 cosine 4 x. Because C would be 0 and D would be 0. Now, what if you are in an electronics course or a vibrations course, some other course where the instructor says no, 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 no. All equations in this course must be sine functions. Okay, fine. Hopefully you know that before you wrote the cosine equation, but what if? All right, now, the first thing you realize is this. A has not changed. B has not changed. D has not changed, but C has changed because sine and cosine are simply functions that are translated left or right of each other. Okay? So I'm going to have to add a horizontal translation. And I don't know what that translation is, but this is what the answer is going to look like. Okay? So now I know this is right. I know this is right. I just need to fill in this number here. Now, Where should sine start? It should start at the axis of symmetry and go up. So it should start at the axis of symmetry and go up. Well, if the maximum is 2 and the minimum is -2, the axis of symmetry will be 0, the x-axis. So I go to this point right here. And if I go from this point up, down, and back to the axis of symmetry, that is a sine wave. So the sine function should start right here. Okay? Problem. If this was a sine function with no horizontal shift, that point would be right here. Okay? Since that point is here, we can deduce that it has been shifted to the right by how much? Well, this is pi over 4, which means the point between it would be pi over 8. So 1/8, 2/8, 3/8 pi. So it's been shifted to the right 3 pi over 8. So we're going to write minus 3 pi over 8. And that would be your sine function. So your cosine function would be 2 cosine of 4x. And your sine function would be 2 sine 4x minus 3 pi over 8. So I hope this video was helpful to you in finding the equation of your trigonometric functions. If you have any questions, please come see me.